Starfleet has built many unusual starships over the centuries. Massive explorers like the Daedalus-class, dedicated warships like the Defiant-class, and long-range science vessels such as the USS Voyager. And they've even made experimental ships capable of bending the laws of physics themselves. But among all of Starfleet's designs, few are as quite unusual as the Olympic-class. At first glance, it doesn't even look like a Starfleet vessel. Instead of the familiar saucer-shaped primary hull we've come to expect, the Olympic-class features a gigantic sphere to connect to a sleek secondary hull and twin warp nacelles. This is strange, it's unconventional, but it is immediately memorable. For many fans, the Olympic-class is forever associated with one specific ship, the USS Pasteur. This vessel is commanded by an alternate future version of Dr. Beverly Crusher in Star Trek The Next Generation's legendary final All Good Things. Yet despite appearing for only a brief period on screen, the Olympic-class has become one of Star Trek's most recognisable starship designs. It's a dedicated hospital ship built to save lives rather than fight battles. It's a vessel designed around medicine rather than exploration of the final frontier. And perhaps it is one of the most important support ships Starfleet ever constructed. In today's Trek Central video, we're exploring the technology, history, lore, and real-world development of the Olympic-class starship. This includes the USS Pasteur, its connection to one of the Next Generation's greatest episodes, and why some fans believe this unusual vessel may even share design DNA with one of Starfleet's oldest starship classes. This being the Daedalus-class from the Enterprise era. Now if you like Star Trek videos, then hit that subscribe button to never miss another from the crew of Trek Central and myself. We've actually got a super cool announcement coming soon that you do not want to miss. Okay, engage. To understand why Starfleet developed the Olympic class, we first need to understand the galaxy it was operating in. By the late 24th century, the Federation had expanded into one of the largest political powers in known space. Hundreds of member worlds, thousands of colonies, and countless starships all depended on Starfleet for protection, exploration, and importantly, support. And with that responsibility came a new challenge. People did need help. Lots of it. Throughout series like The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and even Star Trek Voyager, we repeatedly see Starfleet responding to humanitarian crises. Colonies are devastated by natural disasters, outposts suffer industrial accidents, dangerous diseases spread between worlds, and entire populations require evacuation following attacks or environmental catastrophe. Then there was of course conflict and wars. The Cardassian border conflicts resulted in years of casualties and displaced civilians. Then we have encounters with the Borg, leaving entire starships destroyed in mere minutes. And by the 2370s, the Dominion War would inflict losses on a scale the Federation had rarely experienced before. In many of these situations, sending a Galaxy-class starship wasn't always the most efficient solution. I mean, the Enterprise D could certainly provide medical assistance, and ships like the Intrepid-class carried a fully equipped sickbay. Even smaller vessels, like the Defiant, possessed capable medical facilities. But none of these ships were designed primarily around medicine. Their sickbays were only one component of a much larger mission profile. The Olympic class took a different approach. Instead of treating medicine as a secondary function, Starfleet built an entire vessel around it. This meant every deck, every system, every design choice was all focused on one mission: preserving life. These ships were able to respond to planetary disasters, support relief operations, assist colonies during epidemics, and treat casualties on a scale that would overwhelm conventional starships. In many ways, I think the Olympic class represents the Federation at its very best. This isn't a ship built for exploration, it's not a ship built to wage war, it's not a ship built to project power, but it is a ship built to help people. And perhaps that's why this class feels so uniquely Starfleet. Because at its core, Star Trek has never just been about exploration or technology. It's always been about compassion. I think few starships embody that ideal better than the Olympic class. Now, the Olympic class occupies a unique position within Starfleet. Unlike vessels such as the Galaxy-class, Nebula-class, or even the Sovereign class, the Olympic class was not designed as a multi-purpose explorer, nor was it ever intended to serve as a front-line combat vessel. Instead, the class was purpose-built for a single role: medicine. The Olympic class was essentially a flying hospital. Everything about its design reflects this mission. the internal volume, the ship layout, the transport facilities, the medical laboratories, and even the extensive treatment wards. Every aspect of this vessel was designed around saving lives. This immediately sets the Olympic class apart from almost every other major Starfleet ship we encounter throughout the franchise. Upon first glance, the Olympic class appears much larger than it actually is. The massive spherical primary hull creates the illusion of a vessel comparable in size to a Galaxy-class starship. However, the reality is quite different. At approximately 320 meters in length, the Olympic class sits comfortably in the middle of Starfleet's fleet hierarchy. It's larger than vessels such as the Constitution class that served during Kirk's era, but significantly smaller than the Galaxy-class explorers that dominated much of the late 24th century. The class was constructed at the Marin County Starfleet yards and served as a dedicated hospital ship. Like Starfleet vessels of its time, the Olympic class featured a primary hull and secondary hull, with 2 warp nacelles. Bridge was located on Deck 1, with crew quarters on Deck 5. Now, according to Starship's extended canon, there were 27 decks for the Starship. This allowed for a crew of 750 with 2,000 passengers, but also an available evacuation limit of around 8,000. Impulse engines were located aft. In the late 24th century, the Olympic class was capable of reaching warp 9.2. However, in the Old Future timeline, seen in the Next Generation's All Good Things, the Starship was capable of reaching warp 13. While serving as a medical starship, the vessel was still armed. A twin launcher was mounted on the fore of a primary hull. This dual-purpose launcher could be used for probes or torpedo launchers. Standard Starfleet defense shields were installed, along with phasers for additional tactical operations. The navigational deflector strip was located in the lower primary hull, and a sensor pallet made up the ventral surface of the hull. Airlocks were positioned to either side of the secondary hull beneath the nacelle pylons, and the main shuttle bay was located at the aft of the ship. One of the most interesting discussions surrounding the Olympic class involves another famous Starfleet design, this being the Daedalus-class. We've actually discussed it here on the channel recently, so if you're looking for a dedicated video on the Daedalus-class, go check it out using the link in the video description. Now, you may immediately notice the similarities between these two starships. Both feature a distinctive spherical primary hull. Both stand apart from the more familiar, saucer-shaped Starfleet designs. Both seemingly were designed to fulfill specialized roles rather than serving as traditional deep space explorers, even if the Daedalus-class eventually wound up being that. Officially, in Star Trek canon, there is no confirmed connection between the two classes. The Olympic class was never stated to be a direct descendant of the Daedalus-class, so no canon sources do suggest Starfleet intentionally revisited the older design. However, it is easy to understand why this theory remains popular. The Daedalus-class served during the early years of Starfleet in the 22nd century, while the Olympic class appears more than 2 centuries later. Despite that enormous gap in time, both vessels arrived at a remarkably similar solution, a large spherical primary hull designed to maximize internal volume. For a medical vessel like the Olympic class, that design philosophy makes a great deal of sense. Hospital ships require extensive treatment wards, laboratories, surgical facilities, and emergency accommodation for patients. A spherical hull provides a tremendous amount of usable internal space, without dramatically increasing the ship's overall size. Whether Starfleet engineers were consciously inspired by the Daedalus class, or simply arrived at the same conclusion independently, is still impossible to say. But the comparison remains one of the most fascinating aspects of the Olympic class. Because in a fleet dominated by sleek saucers and elegant curves, these two unusual vessels remind us that sometimes Starfleet's most practical solutions are also its most distinctive. While the Olympic class itself remains one of Starfleet's most unusual vessel designs, there is one ship that has become synonymous with its class. This is the USS Pasteur, registry NCC 58925. For many Star Trek fans, the Pasteur is the Olympic class, in the same vein that the Enterprise D is the Galaxy class. Despite only appearing briefly on screen, the vessel left a lasting impression thanks to its unique design, its commanding officer, and the role it played in one of the Next Generation's greatest stories. The Starship first appeared in the series finale, All Good Things, for the Next Generation. This is an episode that saw Captain Jean-Luc Picard moving through 3 different points in time: the past, the present, and a possible future. It is within this future timeline that we encounter the Olympic-class USS Pasteur, and immediately something has changed. The Federation of this possible 2395 is not the Federation we knew during the Next Generation. All alliances are fractured, the political landscape has shifted, and several familiar faces have followed very different paths throughout life, including Dr. Beverly Crusher. I mean, perhaps one of the most surprising revelations in All Good Things is discovering that Beverly Crusher eventually became a Starship captain. Or more accurately, Captain Beverly Picard. In this possible future timeline, Beverly and Jean-Luc eventually married. Unfortunately, the relationship did not last. The two later divorced, with Beverly choosing to continue her Starfleet career and ultimately taking command of the Olympic-class USS Pasteur. The Next Generation crew had split apart and have gone their separate ways. By this time, the Romulan Star Empire has effectively fallen under Klingon control, creating an entirely new balance of power across the region. When Jean-Luc seeks help to investigate the temporal events he is experiencing, he and old crew members, like Data and LaForge, beam aboard the Pasteur and are greeted by Crusher. From there on, they head across the Klingon border to scan the Devron system for temporal anomalies. Still, the USS Pasteur crew needed to secure passage. To complete this, they contact Worf, who is the governor of a small Klingon colony world near the border. While somewhat ceremonial, and not being a part of the Klingon High Council, this position still grants them enough influence to secure passage for the Pasteur. While scanning the Devron system, Worf reports that several Klingon warships have been dispatched to investigate a supposed renegade Federation vessel, this being the Pasteur. Mr. Data does suggest using an inverse tachyon pulse to scan beyond the subspace barrier. He starts modifications, but Captain Crusher, or Captain Beverly Picard, makes it clear that if they don't find anything in 6 hours, they're heading back to Federation space. Unfortunately, the Pasteur comes under attack from 2 Klingon attack cruisers. These appear to be the new versions of a Negvar warship class. While armed with Starfleet phasers and torpedoes, and protected by shields, the Olympic class was not built for combat against Klingon attack cruisers, and began to take serious damage. Warp power goes offline, with impulse power fluctuating, and the shields are coming down to 30%. Thankfully for the Starfleet crew, the future Galaxy-class USS Enterprise D arrives and saves the day. Admiral William T. Riker hails the Pasteur crew and gets them to beam off the ship. Unfortunately, during the battle, the Pasteur's warp cores become destabilized and is heading towards a breach. With the crew evacuated and the Enterprise making best speed away, it's the end for Crusher's starship. The Olympic-class vessel explodes, ending its service in spectacular fashion. In some ways, I guess all good things do come to an end. Now, you might think the USS Pasteur only exists in the alt future timeline of All Good Things, but that does not seem to be the case. Production artwork for Star Trek Picard Season 2 reveals that in 2401, graduated Starfleet Academy cadets would be assigned to this vessel. While the USS Pasteur remains the most famous Olympic-class vessel, it certainly wasn't the only one to serve in Starfleet. One of the best-known examples from a prime timeline is the USS Quito. Unlike the Pasteur, which only appeared in the alternate future of All Good Things, and maybe in Star Trek Picard, the Quito is firmly established within Star Trek's main continuity thanks to the animated series of Star Trek Lower Decks. The Quito first appears during flashbacks to Ensign Beckett Mariner's earlier Starfleet career, where she served before eventually transferring to the USS Cerritos. During this time, the Olympic-class vessel participated in several notable missions, including a first contact assignment with the Galadorians. That mission didn't go entirely according to plan, however, as the crew later discovered they had failed to properly catalogue parts of the planet's wildlife, leading to an unexpected viral outbreak among the away team. The Quito was also present at Deep Space Nine during the late 2370s, where one of its crew members, Ensign Nico, was exposed as an alien in disguise after fatally attacking another officer. Although this incident was short-lived, it further demonstrated that Olympic-class vessels weren't typically limited to medical emergencies. Like many Starfleet ships, they could routinely travel through Federation space, undertaking a variety of assignments. Perhaps the Quito's greatest contribution to Star Trek canon, however, was simply confirming something fans have wondered for decades. Before Star Trek Lower Decks, the Olympic class was primarily associated with the erased future timeline of All Good Things, while reference books had simply suggested the class existed in the prime timeline. Therefore, on-screen confirmation was still limited. The USS Quito finally settled that debate. Here was an Olympic-class vessel operating in the late 24th century, serving alongside ships like the California-class, and proving that Starfleet had indeed adopted the design beyond Beverly Crusher's alternate future. In many ways, the Quito quietly transformed the Olympic-class from an interesting what-if into a fully canon part of Starfleet history. Thanks to the introduction of the USS Quito, we now know the Olympic-class existed in the main canon of the Star Trek universe, not just in the possible future. Of course, the extended Star Trek canon, so books, comics and games, takes this one step further. In a Next Generation Starfleet Academy novel, the Olympic class is mentioned as having been in service since early 2341. The Star Trek Encyclopedia also confirms that the USS Noble is an Olympic-class vessel, and was among the ships searching for the missing Nebula-class USS Hera in 2370. It's also recorded that the Olympic-class participated in the Dominion War. The Noble would report many casualties during that conflict. It appears the class was still being produced by Starfleet in the 2380s, and in 2385, a brand new starship, the Athena Donald, was loaned to the Rosalind Franklin Institute for Biomedical Research for a groundbreaking science and research mission. In the year of 2387, 3 Olympic-class medical frigates, including the Galen and the Fleming, were dispatched to offer aid to the Romulan Star Empire, following the destruction of Romulus by the Hobus supernova. All 3 of these Olympic-class starships were destroyed on the orders of Nero from his mining ship, the Narada. Meanwhile, in Star Trek Online, the free-to-play video game MMO, the class is still operating in the 25th century. You can actually see it in-game and in some missions. Of course, it has been under an extensive refit, but is still very much in the action and is the same Olympic class. One of the reasons the Olympic class has remained so memorable is that it was created for a very specific purpose. Unlike many Star Trek starships, which are designed around a television series or a recurring production need, the USS Pasteur only had one job: to help sell the future of the Star Trek universe. When production work began on All Good Things, the creative team faced a unique challenge. The episode required audiences to instantly understand they were looking at a Federation decades beyond the events of the Next Generation. Of course, the uniforms needed to look a bit different, the political landscape needed to feel different, and naturally, Starfleet starships need to look different as well. This did mean creating entirely new starships. Of course, the ships did need to look advanced enough to suggest a passage of time, while still feeling unmistakably Federation. The USS Pasteur became the most important examples of that philosophy. Because the moment the audience saw it in that episode, they knew they were looking at something from the future. The story of the Pasteur begins with visual effects artist Bill George. George was already well known within the Star Trek production world, having worked extensively on visual effects and miniature design. However, the ship would eventually become a Pasteur wasn't originally built for the All Good Things episode. It was more of a personal project. George had created the model independently, experimenting with ideas and concepts that interested him as a designer. When the production team needed a future Federation vessel for the series finale, the model caught their attention. Rather than building an entirely new starship from scratch, the decision was made to use George's design. It's one of those wonderful Star Trek stories where a personal passion project unexpectedly becomes part of franchise history. Had circumstances been slightly different, the Olympic class might never have existed at all. Yet thanks to that opportunity, one of Starfleet's most distinctive vessels found its way onto the screen. Of course, perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the Olympic class is that its origins may actually stretch all the way back to the 1960s. This meant long before the Next Generation, long before the Enterprise as we know it, long before most of modern Star Trek even existed. When Matt Jefferies was developing the original USS Enterprise for Star Trek's first pilot, numerous concepts were explored. Today, we can picture the Constitution class. It's very famous. Even non-Star Trek fans know that is Star Trek and it is the Enterprise, because it's got the saucer, the engineering hull, and the nacelles. Arguably, it's one of the most iconic spacecraft designs ever created in the history of science fiction. But during development, none of that was guaranteed. As we recently discussed in the Daedalus video, Jefferies experimented with a variety of hull shapes and configurations. Among them was a concept featuring a large spherical primary hull. This idea was unfortunately abandoned. However, the reasoning behind it did remain sound. From an engineering perspective, a sphere is one of the most efficient pressure vessels imaginable. It distributes stress evenly, it maximizes internal volume, and it offers excellent structural integrity. Decades later, those same principles would help define the Olympic class. Whether consciously or subconsciously, the Pasteur feels like the realization of an idea Star Trek had been carrying since the very beginning. Of course, you might be wondering why the Olympic class doesn't look like other Starfleet starships. Let's be honest, most Starfleet vessels do share a common visual language, this being a saucer section, warp nacelles, and the secondary hull. Even radically different ships tend to follow this basic formula. The Olympic class breaks that pattern. And that's exactly why it works. The ship immediately communicates its role. You don't look at the Pasteur and think battleship, you don't think explorer, you don't think flagship. Instead, it feels somewhat supportive, protective, and practical. The enormous spherical hull dominates the design, visually reinforcing the idea that internal space matters more than tactical capabilities. It's one of the few Star Trek starships where the mission profile is somewhat immediately obvious from the exterior alone. Now that's excellent design work. It's also a major reason why fans continue to remember the ship despite its limited screen time. Of course, I could argue that another reason the Olympic class resonates with fans is because it explores an aspect of Starfleet we sometimes don't see en masse, this being medicine. Yes, Star Trek frequently focuses on exploration and conflict, and we do get the occasional medical episodes. We typically follow captains, security officers, engineers, admirals, and sometimes the doctor, but only in their sick bay. In this respect, the Federation is also a civilization built on humanitarian ideals. For every Galaxy-class exploring strange new worlds, there must also be starships responding to disasters. We sort of got a bit of this with the California-class in Star Trek Lower Decks. The Olympic-class vessels will be transporting medical supplies, treating casualties, fighting disease outbreaks, and providing humanitarian relief. Essentially, the Olympic-class gives us a glimpse of that side of Starfleet, a side that very rarely gets to see the spotlight. And because of that, it feels unique even among the hundreds of Starship designs that now exist throughout the franchise. You know, as we round out this video, I think what's perhaps most remarkable is how little screen time the Olympic class actually received in the Next Generation. The Pasteur only appears briefly. It has very few lines of dialogue actually associated with it. And in typical Star Trek fashion, it is ultimately destroyed before the episode concludes. By most measures, it should have been forgotten. Instead, the opposite happened. Trekkies embraced this design. Technical manuals expanded upon it, reference books documented its specifications. Even licensed publications explored its role within Starfleet. I mean, the USS Noble helped establish the class within the Prime timeline before the Quito came along. That's a remarkable achievement for a ship that originally existed only to populate an alternate future. Now today, more than 30 years after the episode of All Good Things first aired, the Olympic class remains one of the most beloved niche ship designs in Star Trek. Not because it won great battles like the Defiant, not because it explored distant areas of the galaxy like Voyager, and not because it served as the hero ship of an entire series, like the Enterprise D. Instead, it endures because it offered something different, a glimpse into Starfleet's humanitarian future. A ship dedicated to healing, a ship dedicated to medical support. This was a design unlike anything else in the fleet at that time. It's also kind of proof that sometimes the most memorable starships aren't the ones carrying the biggest weapons, or the biggest crew. They're the ones carrying hope in sometimes very dark times. Well, that's our wrap up on the Olympic class in Star Trek. If you enjoyed this video, please let us know in the comment section below what starship, or design, or technology in Star Trek we should take a look at next. As mentioned, you can support the development of Trek Essentials videos. Please join our Patreon via the link below. You'll get exclusive access to videos and events, as well as more Galaxy-class rewards. If you want to keep up to date on the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media or join our community Discord server. For now, I've been Captain Jack, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Live long and prosper, my friends. Goodbye.